Welcome to the Special Needs Kids Are People Too podcast with Amy Bodkin, EDS. Amy is an autistic adult who also happens to be a school psychologist turned special needs consultant and public speaker. She's also a homeschooling mom to 2 autistic kiddos, a yoga instructor, a card-carrying Trekkie, and an all-around fun person. And last but not least, Amy is an advocate for seeing every child as a person, not a diagnosis. Because a special needs kid is just like any other child, just more so. Here's Amy Bodkin.
Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin, coming to you from the blanket fort in my office, and welcome to Special Needs Kids Are People Too. We have been talking about stories and the impact that stories can have on people with all sorts of needs, but especially when we're going through some kind of trauma or have some kind of difference or sometimes feel disconnected from others or even ourselves. One of the areas of storytelling that can be particularly problematic or challenging for autistics as well as other people, but autistics especially, I know, is religion. This can be a really challenging area for autistics. In fact, many of us, when we grow up to be adults, choose not to have religion in our lives at all and choose to be atheists. It is definitely a challenging area. I work with families who have all sorts of different value systems. So my goal when I'm working with a family is to always try to work within their particular values and belief system. I have Jewish families, Christian families, Muslim families, pagan families, Hindi families, so many different kinds of families, and also all of the variations within each of those. So there are plenty of different areas out there, and I have always made it my business personally to make sure that I'm working within somebody else's belief structure. It's honestly completely unethical to do otherwise. To take somebody who is experiencing difficulty and then to try and change their belief system only adds to whatever difficulty and trauma they're experiencing already. That on the front end, I wanted to make sure I prefaced what I'm about to say with that. The other thing I want to preface what I'm about to say with is, I don't need your opinion about my religious journey. I'm going to share some examples to try to help you understand the perspective of a lot of autistics. But just because I'm sharing my personal examples does not mean that I need your opinion about it. You're welcome to have your opinion. I just don't need it. This is my journey and no one else's. So my story really, if you want to go back to the very beginning, I was raised in a fairly fundamentalist evangelical religious group, and I went to school at a school that was run by that group, and I went every single time the doors was open to services, and honestly, I definitely experienced some challenges earlier on because religion is a social construct. Lots of autistics do experience challenges with religion being a social construct. It's not necessarily that people's beliefs are a social construct, but how they practice and interact with those beliefs is definitely influenced by our social constructs. So that's something to consider. And it was definitely something that was a challenge. Another thing that was a challenge is being part of a highly verbal religion when you are very dyslexic and autistic, where everything is verbal. And I'm not an autistic person who highly connects with words. Some do. I don't. I'm much more of a picture thinker, so to say. So I found that also to be particularly challenging. Our sensory needs and our learning needs can definitely impact how we interact with religion. And then I also think that another area that was particularly challenging was the story component. In all religions, we tell stories. Whether we think those stories are true or not, we tell stories. And I think we've learned throughout history that sometimes the best way to get across an idea is through a story, which is true. However, some stories from religions are very not age appropriate for children. And some of them get into some topics that can really mess with your head. For example, when my mother taught me about the 10 plagues, I was like, hold the phone. What do you mean he killed the firstborn? I'm a firstborn, and I definitely don't identify as a Hebrew, so I'm pretty sure. Does he still do that? Because if he still does that, I'm really not down with that. So yeah, that was definitely a challenge area, and I'm not the only one who's had those kinds of challenges. And also, like, the logic. Sometimes if the logic of your beliefs doesn't stand up to an autistic's logic, then a lot of times we're very tempted to say, go pound sand, or no way. Logic is very important to us. Sometimes it's how we see the world. Like, we see the world in these patterns sometimes, and when our patterns don't match or it doesn't fit, then no, we cannot compute that. So that was a big part of my journey at first. Things definitely took a significant turn when I was 12. I was going to a Christian school, and we had a traveling Holocaust visit come to our town. And we went after reading the Diary of Anne Frank, and our docent was a survivor. And I know that it was definitely a very powerful experience for a lot of people, but I don't know of anyone who had the same experience that I did. I walked away from that exhibit and had nightmares for at least 15 years of Nazis being under my bed. I was terrified. I would wake up in the middle of the night too afraid to leave my bed because I was afraid that there was one under my bed. So a lot of people have dreams of monsters under their bed. I had dreams of, in some ways, real life monsters under my bed. It was terrifying. I had never met anyone who was Jewish at that time. There was no reason for me to be concerned from that angle anyways. The only thing that I can think of now, about 30 years later, is that I think that there were photos in the exhibit of people with disabilities. And it is possible that I identified so much because of that. I don't know. But it definitely had an extremely powerful impact on me. What's interesting is that about 10 years later, I ended up accidentally marrying a Jew. I know that sounds rather odd, but my husband was born Jewish, but due to trauma, it was not something that was really connected with or shared. There'd been trauma in the family a bit back. But he was born quite Jewish. There's always kind of a question as to who's Jewish and how Jewish are you, because it's not exactly just a religion, it's not exactly just an ethnicity. It's more like a large family where you have people adopting in and things like that. So I found out after we had been married several years, and we dated like 5 years before we got married, and somehow I never found out until after we were married that he was Jewish. And it really concerned me because I feel very strongly, especially having had some of the life experiences I've had, that it's really important to love and appreciate all parts of yourself. I think that an autistic person probably can understand that better sometimes than maybe your average person, because we know what it feels like sometimes to not love all of yourself, especially if we haven't been taught to appreciate our differences. So for me, it was very important to start learning more about, well, what does it mean to be Jewish? What is Jewish culture? Which, let me tell you, I know a lot of times people don't realize this, but Jewish culture is very different from what is described as Jewish from a Christian perspective. And I can say that because I grew up Christian, and it's very, very different. Even in the way that people interact with each other, there are significant cultural differences. Most of the time in Jewish groups, people are a lot more direct, less, not that people are rude, but it's more direct. In some ways, kind of like talking to an autistic person. Actually, speaking of which, we'll get to this later, a lot of autistics find Jewish culture rather comfortable. Yeah, they do. And actually, I have met more autistic adults at a temple, and they were all autistics who had converted. And I know other autistics in other areas of the country that are also Jewish converts. So it's a significant thing within a very small population, so I'm not sure that we could have numbers on it, but there's definitely quite a few. So I started exploring some of where he came from, what was his culture that he had kind of shut himself off from, I guess. And I also started teaching our kids about that, because that's part of where they came from too. And they needed to learn about what that meant. And it was also interesting because when my children were small, we were going to a church, because that's what I'd grown up with. And I was trying to teach them all about God, the Bible, because that's what I'd grown up with. And it seemed like, well, this is what you do with small children. You teach them Bible stories and those kinds of things. And none of it was making any sense because they had very little language, and I could tell it wasn't clicking, but it was also something that was very important to me that I wanted to share with them. And so I started incorporating more Jewish holidays in our home in an effort to help them connect with where their dad came from, and also in an effort to help them connect better, because we didn't have any holidays in the tradition I grew up in. And I found that holidays actually work, because holidays are something that everyone can participate in. Other things involve a certain amount of language, certain amount of developmental skill, but holidays are something everyone can participate in some way. That was very powerful to learn. As we went along, we had one day, and I checked with my family before sharing all of this, and this story has never been shared publicly before, so you're the first to get to hear it. We took our daughter with us. My husband would go to church with me too, and we took her to Easter one Sunday, and I had thought, oh, Easter bunny, Easter eggs, how bad can it be? It'll be great. And I was her Sunday school teacher that week, and I know exactly what happened in class. And we watched a video as a group with other classes, and she came away from that class with the idea that in order to die, you had to be crucified. And for the next 7 years, she had recurring nightmares that de-evolved into an absolute terror of hell, Satan, Jesus, everything. I had taught Sunday school for about 15 years, and so I pulled out every trick in my bag of ways to explain it in a way that wouldn't be traumatic, but she had very little language at the time, and I understand a lot better now how that ended up happening, and I, in many ways, wish I could go back and undo it, because we never like causing our children pain. However, getting to watch her walk forward from that point has been one of the greatest honors of my life, to get to be there with her and to help support her. It's taught me a lot about the fact that we all have a journey to take in this life. And nobody can walk our journey except for us. And if we believe that God has us walk these journeys, then we have to believe that we can trust that He is guiding us, or she, or it, or whatever you believe. Apply it to your own beliefs. And to think that we know better than the creator of the universe is extremely arrogant. So I've learned to be a lot less judgmental, a lot more open-minded. I've learned to listen more, and I've learned to be supportive, even when I don't exactly know where we're going. And so after 7 years of nightmares, doing everything I could think of, I finally said, you know what? Let's see what Judaism has to say about this. You know, you're part Jewish. Maybe the Jewish answer will make sense to you. Maybe that'll help you. And so we did a little bit of looking up, Googling some of the things that were bothering her the most. And she said, that's it. I'm Jewish. I'm like, all right. And she never had another nightmare again. And I was astounded. Sometimes you just have to find the thing that helps you through the trauma. With children, they can't fully process the trauma. There was no way I was going to be able to help her process through any of that and come to a logical conclusion that what she was afraid of wasn't really scary, because she doesn't have the brain development yet, even today, to be able to logically process that. I mean, she's a brilliant child, and she can think about so many things, but her brain is still not fully developed. It's still a challenge. Like when we tried to learn about Leonardo da Vinci, studying the Last Supper painting, she about had a conniption. So we still have to be careful to this day, even though she has lots of friends and relatives who are Christian. Those things can be a real challenge. So one of the things that we did while processing trauma was to listen very carefully to our children. Our children do not have the baggage and past experiences that we do. And sometimes our children intuitively know what they need in that moment. And it is not my job to tell my children who they need to be. It is my job to connect my children to God, to good morals, to beliefs or values that root and ground them. It is to help them connect with this world around them and to form their own relationships and to learn what it means to be them. They offer a special gift to this world. Each person does. And when we aren't who we are born to be, then we deprive the world of a great gift. Just like you wouldn't want all of your presents to be the same. You don't truly want every person to be the same.
Are you homeschooling a student or want to be homeschooling a student who learns a little different from the average student? I'd highly recommend checking out a Charlotte Mason Plenary. A Charlotte Mason Plenary is a homeschool company focused on the philosophy of Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason was an educational philosopher in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who recognized the importance of not just educating a child body and mind, but also educating them as a whole person with a diet rich in the humanities, the studies of what makes us better human beings. It is not enough to know everything. You also have to know how to use that knowledge in a way that contributes positively to the world. A Charlotte Mason Plenary has all sorts of resources for helping you do Charlotte Mason your way. We also have form guides over there that allow you to plan a customized curriculum in 3 easy steps. And I even partnered with a Charlotte Mason Plenary to create a developmental form guide that goes with these guides, that explains to you where to place your child and how to make all sorts of adaptations for different types of learners. Go check it out at cmplenary.com.
And there were a lot of other challenges associated with our story. Those are the big, broad brushstrokes. There was also, I think, some generational unhealthiness in thought process, or at least it turned out that way to be so for me. History of anxiety, things like that definitely complicated matters. I also discovered that I don't do well in a verbal tradition. I do much better in a sensory-rich tradition. I connect well with things through my senses, not through my words. And that was important for me. So through that journey, we ended up finding a place where we could all heal and learn something. A place where we could learn to listen a little bit more. So, having given you a little bit of insight into some of the trauma that we went through, I think that we can say that there's definitely potential for trauma in religion. Some of it is in the beliefs and stories, because it depends on how you interpret those. And we do not think the same way that everybody else does. And the way something hits us very differently. Most kids, when they learn about the Easter story, do not come away with the idea that in order to die you have to be crucified. Most children who learn about the 10 plagues do not come away with this idea that God still kills the firstborn. And there's also a lot of potential for difficulty with regard to beliefs. If your logic doesn't totally stand up to reason, it's not going to hold. And especially when you apply any kind of literal or logical reasoning, you are opening yourself up. The less logic and the less literal interpretation you have, the less likely you are to have problems, because we can't find holes in it if it doesn't exist. So that's definitely one of the areas where there's potential for trauma. Another area and that's actually, I think, one of the reasons why Reform Judaism is as popular as it is with so many autistics. It's very open and accepting, but two, it also does not tell you what to believe, and it doesn't even tell you how much you have to practice. It kind of leaves a lot of those things open for you, and it kind of gives a lot of autistics the opportunity to come to things as they're ready with what works for them. So I think, not that it doesn't stand for anything, there's a strong tradition that Reform Judaism comes out of, and that strong tradition is definitely rooting. So that's one area, like beliefs and interpretations. That can be a real challenge and potential area for trauma. Another area is trying to connect spiritually when you are not connecting, or you're being asked to connect in a way that doesn't really work for you. I am not a very verbal person. Despite the fact that I talk a lot, I don't experience things well verbally. I do much better connecting sensory-wise, and I really need that. It helps to connect me and to root me. I used to have a hard time with prayer too, because I was always taught that prayer is speaking your heart, and there's definitely that aspect of it, but a lot of times my heart couldn't give you the words for what it felt. And I would hear all these people who would say all these beautiful prayers, but I did not have the words to describe, and it served to kind of disconnect me from prayer. Oh, that's that thing you don't do well. So I think that's another area, how our sensory differences as well as our processing differences can sometimes serve as a barrier. Is it intended? No. But do kids interpret it that way? Yeah, often. So those are two very big ways you can have the potential for trauma. I would sum it up as teachings and experiences. And experiences can go beyond just, how you connect to God. It can be the setting for worship. Some people prefer a very quiet, sensory deprivation type worship experience, and other people want it to be as loud and bright and energetic as possible. Some people prefer more liturgical, where there's a specific pattern that's relatively dependable. Some people prefer for it to be more spontaneous, and there's different preferences. And sometimes we have family members who have completely separate preferences. And so sometimes it can be difficult to find one type of worship or one house of worship that can honor the needs of everyone. Sometimes we might be able to find a place to belong, but maybe we choose different activities within that place. Maybe we don't all go at the same time. Those are some possibilities. Other things involve just the setup. I remember when my kids were small, being able to take them anywhere was a challenge, because I had one who would run off at a moment's notice. I can't count the number of times she almost tried to jump off a balcony. And that was with me watching her very, very carefully. She just found danger easily. And we tried very, very hard to keep her safe, like a lot of other parents who have an autistic child. If they don't have an awareness of danger, it can be incredibly difficult to keep them safe, because you have to constantly have eyes on another person and never get distracted. There's also the sensory differences, trying to have room for everyone to have their needs met. That can be a challenge in a family, and it's an even bigger challenge in an area where you have a place of worship, because there's a lot of families coming together. So the big questions I want to leave you guys with, and I'm not going to give you any answers, I'm going to give you some ideas, and hopefully that will spark some thought for you as you approach this, either with your kids, your own house of worship, however you see yourself connecting with other kids and spirituality. And I do think that there is value in helping kids find a positive connection with their own spirits, regardless of beliefs. Learning to listen inside to that part of you that's not your mind and not your body, and connect. I think that's really important. So, ways we can support. As far as helping kids connect, two of the things I love recommending the most are holidays and liturgy. And the reason that I like recommending those two things is because those are things that everyone can participate in. You don't have to have the right words. You don't even have to say the words. You can just sit. Or at least in Judaism, you can kind of rock back and forth. That tends to be a modality of prayer in Judaism, which is probably partially why a lot of autistics end up finding Reform Judaism. The holidays are really helpful because holidays are kind of set up so everyone can participate. Maybe it's coming together for a meal. Well, most people eat. Everybody eats something, but you have tube feeding too, but then maybe you'd have a special tube feeding. I don't know. But there's always traditions that go along with holidays, and you can choose the traditions that work for your family. So I think holidays and liturgy are really important. Now, I also tend to discourage families from teaching a lot of Bible stories when kids are young. The reason is because a lot of those stories are really not age appropriate. We've got all kinds of stories on topics that are not appropriate in the Bible. We've got examples of incest and rape and murder and dismemberment. There's all kinds of stuff in there that's just not child appropriate. And giving kids more time to develop and to be able to process before we start with stories can be very helpful. And it's not just the Bible. History and science can also present ideas that can be overwhelming to children when they're not ready for those ideas. And usually your brain will protect you from those ideas, but sometimes when your brain isn't developing in the same way everybody else's is, it doesn't. And I've seen this happen over and over again. I already mentioned my experiences with learning about the Holocaust. I've mentioned both me and my daughter's experiences with Bible study. And I also, well, I didn't mention this yet, but with science, my daughter was quite horrified when we learned that plants look green because they reflect green light and they absorb all the other colors of light. She found that to be rather disturbing. Well, if they show green light because they're absorbing the others, how do they really look? If they don't really look green, how do they really look? That can be a bit of a brain twister. So some of these ideas are things we're not ready for until our brains have developed sufficiently to not be terrified by them. And waiting on stories until kids are really ready to hear them can be a good thing. Character stories, though, those are fantastic. I remember when I was a kid, we had a series of books on tape called Agape Land. And they were about the fruits of the Spirit. And we loved them. And they were very positive stories. And they were pretend stories about kids, kind of like us. I think one of my favorites is the Gentleness story. It was about some kids, and they made a friend who was new to their country. And she ended up running away crying. And their mother sat them down and said that she was in some ways like a china plate. She had had a china plate when she was little that she had accidentally broken, and that some things and some people have to be treated with gentleness. So little stories like that that teach values that aren't scary and don't approve inappropriate content, those are great. A lot of times people will think it's all about what you know, but it's really not about what you know. It's about relationship and keeping those relationships positive. Now, as far as organizations go, I've talked to churches before about how we can help support families who have various needs. We just got done having my daughter's bat mitzvah at our temple. And when we had her bat mitzvah, we had sensory rooms downstairs because we knew that a ton of autistic people would be there. And I'm like, we need to have sensory rooms for all those people when the noise gets to be too loud. And so we made sure that we had that. There were a lot of other things that we did a little bit differently from the way things might typically be done. They were all small decisions, like having allergy-friendly food options, or some of our decor choices were a little outside the box. But a lot of it was geared more towards accommodating families with differences. And so I think that as organizations, it helps to think about how can we allow people to come into this space and be themselves. Who are they when they are themselves, and how can we allow them to come into this space and be that? Because when you have the courage to be yourself, and when you have the courage to let other people be themselves with you, you open up your space to all kinds of wonderful learning opportunities that can teach your congregation valuable lessons. That was actually part of the blessing that the rabbi gave my daughter, was that he said she is someone with a lot of courage, and she is. Someone with a lot of courage who has taught our congregation a great deal just by being herself and showing that courage, the courage to show up and be who you are and share that with other people. I think adults often know just how hard that can be. And you're going to have to open up the possibilities. Think outside the box. What can that look like? Can we use technology to help us? Maybe we make use of Zoom to be able to Zoom some of the services so that people can have control over the audio visual so it's comfortable to them. Maybe we come up with online events where people can connect in addition to our in-person events. Maybe we have spaces that are quieter, or have a computer room where people can have their own headsets that they can put on and connect that way. I've heard of some churches that have like an avatar set up where you can sign into your church service, have your own avatar, wander around the church building online. So there's all kinds of cool, creative ways to connect. For kids, I've seen some people providing families with a sensory bag so that you've got options each week. Sometimes people will do Sunday school classes. Instead of always doing them by age group, what if you created family units? Because not all kids are at the same level developmentally, even if they're at the same age. There are so many different possibilities that we're not making use of. I remember when I was a little kid, we had a vacation Bible school one time. And it was studying the wandering in the desert of the Israelites. And we each were assigned to a different family tribe. We each had a tent with our own flag, and each group had different age groups and ability levels, and it was more like a family. And that worked out really well. I think thinking of classroom settings as less like a classroom and more like a family is probably going to be more effective for most people, because families accommodate for the people in the room. And classrooms, though we try to, they are limited by their structure. That's why a lot of autistics do better with homeschooling, because it's within a family. And we have ultimate flexibility within our families as compared to a structured setting like a school or a worship place. Encouraging families to take advantage of the freedom of staying at home with their children from services, but giving them ways to connect with each other. Maybe you encourage moms to stay home with their little kids and have a mom's study group that meets online during church services so that they can try and connect with other moms like them. Finding ways of having traditions in your home. I remember during the pandemic, it felt very disconcerting, and it was difficult to figure out, one day bled into another. They all felt the same, and I found that the tradition of lighting candles every Friday night was very rooting throughout the pandemic, because it helped me connect with, what day is it? Who are we? Who are we connected with from the past? Who are we as a people? Those kinds of traditions that we can have in our homes can provide some of that rooting, especially when a larger social setting isn't as comfortable. So finding ways to create traditions or emphasize holidays, liturgical type prayers. I know there's a book called Every Moment Holy that is kind of a Protestant, it's a try for a Protestant liturgical prayer book. I think there's even a prayer for the first morning cup of coffee and finishing a book. So I like to recommend that one to my Protestant families because a lot of them don't have as much of a liturgical service as my Jewish and Catholic families and Eastern Orthodox. And of course, my Muslim families, they have specific prayer times with specific postures. And I think that can also be a rather rooting tradition. And it's something that you can do with kids without a ton of pressure. Every day I'm putting down my mat to pray at this time. They don't have to, but they can be around me and they can see me do it. Those kinds of traditions where we just kind of walk it out and allow people to be with us however they wish to be with us. And I think really that's the key, not just in a family, but in larger social situations. It's remembering that we're family, we're part of the human family, and we want to allow each person the freedom to be themselves, because when we can be ourselves and they can be their selves, we're opening ourselves up to all sorts of gifts. I hope that this description has helped you understand a little bit more some of the challenges, difficulties, and given you some insights into what it is like to be autistic and to try to connect with religion. It's something that I've always enjoyed and found interesting. I love mythology, and mythology is basically the story of another person's religion. So it's an interest area of mine and something I enjoy having as a part of my life. But even so, it doesn't mean that I haven't had challenges with that due to a lot of the differences that exist within myself. And I think it's important to remember as we leave this topic that each person has their own journey to take, and you are not living inside their body, you're not living inside their mind, and you can't know what it feels like to be them. And we have to trust God, the universe, whatever your belief system is. Trust that that person has the resources that they need to travel whatever journey it is that they have to travel. And that your job as their relative, parent, friend, minister, whoever you are, that your job is to have a relationship with them and to offer your support as they work to develop a relationship with this world and everything in it and everything that created it, everything above it, everything. And if we can do that, I think it'd go towards solving a lot of disagreements in this world. So, thanks for joining me today for a challenging and difficult topic. And I look forward to our next episode, which will be much lighter.
We hope you had fun listening to today's episode and gained some new insights into the wonderful variety of people in our world. You can find out more about Amy's advocacy work at amybodkin.com. And remember, special needs kids are people too.